The electric chair room. Secrets of Sing Sing's execution chamber. The chair awakes. If you think justice is clean, quick, and painless, you've never been inside Sing Sing. Hit subscribe before we go in, because once those doors close, they don't open the same way again. It was a bitter winter morning in 1941 when the silence of Sing Sing prison was shattered by the echo of heavy boots on stone. Down a narrow, dimly lit corridor known as the Last Mile, a small group of men marched slowly, every step a drumbeat of inevitability. The man in the middle, Robert Gleason, age 32, was pale, eyes hollow, lips trembling. He wasn't crying. He'd passed that stage hours ago. Now he just wanted it to be over. Gleason had been convicted of killing a store clerk in a robbery gone wrong. But the story had deeper layers. Whispered rumors that he was protecting someone else, maybe a higher-up, maybe even someone inside the system. The newspapers had called him the gentleman killer, because he never resisted, never protested, never begged for mercy. But when the guards strapped him into the chair that morning, something in his voice made the room go cold. "I didn't kill that man," he whispered. "You did." The witnesses shifted uncomfortably. The warden, Edward Gannon, signaled for the current to flow. The switch was thrown. 2,000 volts of electricity surged through Gleason's body. The smell of burning cloth filled the air. The official record marked the execution as successful. But the technician noticed something strange. The second indicator light flickered for a moment, something that shouldn't have happened. A minor electrical glitch, they said. A coincidence. But it wasn't the last one. Over the following months, prison staff began to report odd incidents around the execution chamber. A faint humming sound when the lights were off. Metal restraints found unbuckled in the morning. A guard claimed he heard whispering through the intercom, a man's voice repeating the same words over and over, "You did." The warden dismissed it as superstition. Sing Sing had seen hundreds die in that same chair. Fear and nerves were part of the job. But behind the strict discipline of the guards, there was growing unease. Some refused to enter the room alone. Others started drinking on shift. And when one of them, Officer Mills, suffered a breakdown and resigned, he left behind a note with 3 words, "The current remembers." The chair wasn't just a piece of machinery. It had a presence. Investigators came to inspect after rumors reached the governor's office. The wiring was tested, the circuits replaced, the room sterilized. Everything was normal. Yet on the night of March 9, 1942, when the next execution was scheduled, that of a mob enforcer named Dominic Russo, the strange occurrences returned. Russo was a tough man, the kind who'd sneer at death. But that night, as the priest read him his last rites, he kept asking one question, "Who's the guy in the corner?" The priest turned, confused. The room was empty except for the guards and the warden. Russo's eyes widened. "He's right there, in the smoke. I can see him. He's laughing." When the current hit, the chamber's power surged and the entire north block went dark. 4:38 seconds, Sing Sing was swallowed in pitch blackness. When the lights returned, smoke hung heavy in the air, and every man in that room swore they smelled something metallic, like burnt copper mixed with ozone. The press got wind of the blackout, but officials buried the story. Routine malfunction, the warden told reporters. But privately he requested a transfer. He never worked another execution again. By 1943, Old Sparky, as the inmates called it, had claimed dozens more lives. But there was a pattern emerging, a series of coincidences that no one could explain. Every man executed after Gleason had one thing in common. They were all connected to his case in some way. The judge, the prosecutor, the gang associate who turned him in. All dead. Some from the chair. Some later outside these walls, a car crash, a fall, a sudden stroke. Too many to ignore. Detective Paul Redding, a state investigator assigned to review the deaths, began piecing together the trail. Redding was no believer in curses, but he'd spent enough time around killers to know when something didn't add up. He visited Sing Sing in December of that year, alone. He spoke to the guards, examined the chair, and reviewed Gleason's old files. What he found was chilling. The original confession had been signed under duress. The real suspect, a man named Victor Carr, had disappeared just days before Gleason's arrest. And guess who'd been the arresting officer? Warden Edward Gannon himself, the man who'd pulled the switch on Gleason's execution. When Redding confronted the warden, Gannon refused to talk. But his eyes betrayed something between guilt and terror. That night, Redding stayed at a nearby motel and wrote a letter to his supervisor. It was never delivered. He was found the next morning in his car, the engine running, a wire wrapped neatly around his wrist, like a cord from an electric chair. Official cause of death, suicide. But inside Sing Sing the whispers grew louder. The chair doesn't kill, one inmate said. It collects. And by 1944, even the governor would be forced to ask the question no one wanted to say aloud. Was the state's instrument of justice somehow taking justice into its own hands? When they reopened the chamber to prepare for the next execution, one of the technicians found something scratched beneath the armrest. Letters faint but legible, burned into the wood by years of heat and electricity. 3 words. The current remembers. The room that never forgot. The hallway leading to Sing Sing's execution chamber was unlike any other place in America. It wasn't the kind of corridor built for men to return from, it was a one-way passage. Cold concrete. Dim yellow lights. The hum of the generator always present, even when the chair sat silent. Guards called it the last mile, but among themselves they had another name for it, the Whisper Hall. Because as they said, the walls whispered back. Detective Ray Holbrook stood there that afternoon, looking through the small, wired glass window of the sealed chamber. The electric chair, nicknamed Old Sparky, sat under a lone hanging bulb. Dust motes floated in the air like lost souls. But it wasn't the history that drew Ray to Sing Sing, it was a murder. Earlier that morning, a prison maintenance worker named Paul Marin had been found dead in that very room. The same place where hundreds had met their end. But Paul wasn't an inmate, he was a civilian. And his death didn't fit any easy category. There were no burn marks, no signs of electrocution, no external injuries at all. Just a look of pure terror frozen on his face. The warden, Arthur Bellamy, stood by, arms crossed. He was working the wiring panel, Bellamy said. Said he heard something strange last night. Came back in early to check it. Then, this. Holbrook's partner, Detective Liz Carver, crouched beside the body. Heart attack. Maybe, Holbrook said, though his tone betrayed doubt. But why here? Why alone before dawn? Liz looked up. You think it's connected to the chair? He didn't answer. Instead, his eyes drifted to a mark on the floor, a faint outline of something square, where the electric chair had once been bolted before being decommissioned. Yet strangely the bolts were warm. Get the coroner to rush this, Ray said. And seal this room. No one comes in or out. Bellamy shifted uneasily. You don't understand, detective. That room has been sealed since 1963. The power to the chair's been cut for decades. Ray turned sharply. Then explain the heat coming off those bolts. The investigation spread quickly. The media caught wind, mystery death in Sing Sing's execution room, and soon reporters gathered at the gates. The prison's history of execution had always fascinated the public, but now it seemed the ghosts of its past were stirring again. By evening, Ray sat in his car reviewing the files of every man executed in that chair. Over 600 names. Murderers, thieves, gangsters. But one name stood out. William Trent, executed in 1951. The file described him as calm until the very end, when he suddenly screamed something moments before the switch was flipped. You'll hear me again. Most dismissed it as madness. But Holbrook didn't believe in coincidences. The next day Liz brought in the coroner's report. This doesn't make sense, she said, sliding the folder across his desk. No trauma, no poison, no cardiac arrest. But there's something else, you need to see this. Holbrook opened the file. Inside was a high-resolution scan of Marin's skin. Tiny electrical burns, microscopic, running in thin lines along his forearms. Low voltage, Liz said quietly. Like from old wiring. But the panel he was working on wasn't even connected to the grid. Ray leaned back in his chair, the weight of history pressing down on him. Someone's been inside that room, he said finally. Someone who knows how to hide it. Or something, Liz murmured. He shot her a look. No, don't go there. Everything has a reason. Even this. That night, Ray returned to the prison alone. The halls were silent except for the buzz of ancient lights. As he approached the execution chamber, he noticed a faint glow seeping from beneath the steel door. Inside the room was cold. The chair, still unbolted, sat in the corner like an artifact. But on the far wall, something had changed. A fresh handprint, dark, greasy, was smeared on the concrete. Ray raised his flashlight, following it upward. The print trailed toward the ceiling as if someone, or something, had climbed. He froze. A faint clicking sound came from the wiring panel. Then a low hum. The same hum described in the reports of those who'd once thrown the switch. Suddenly, every light in the room flickered. The bulb above the chair blazed white for a split second, then exploded, plunging everything into darkness. Who's in here? Ray barked, gun raised. No answer. Only that electrical hum, now louder, rising from beneath the floor. He stumbled backward, bumping into something, a chair leg. But when he turned, old Sparky wasn't in the corner anymore. It was back in the center of the room. And the bolts on the floor were glowing faint red. Ray's heart pounded. He backed toward the door, fumbling for the handle, when a voice echoed softly, barely audible but unmistakable. "Detective Holbrook, you wanted the truth." He spun around. Empty. The voice came again, this time from the intercom on the wall, one that hadn't been connected in years. "Sit down, and listen." The lights flickered again, then steadied. On the seat of the chair lay something new, a photograph, old and yellowed. Ray picked it up. It was a black and white image of the chamber from 1951. Guards, a priest, a man strapped to the chair. And standing beside him, someone who looked exactly like the current warden, Arthur Bellamy. But the caption at the bottom froze his blood. "Execution of William Trent, witnessed by Officer A. Bellamy." Holbrook's breath caught. The Bellamy in the photo couldn't be the same man. They were identical, but this was taken 74 years ago. Outside the chamber, the sound of footsteps echoed. Slow, deliberate. "Detective," came Bellamy's calm voice from beyond the door. "You shouldn't be in there after hours." Holbrook swallowed. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." "Do I?" Bellamy said softly. "Because if you stay in there any longer, you might end up just like the others who looked too closely." There was a pause. The sound of a lock sliding into place. The detective lunged for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Then the lights died again. Only the hum of the generator remained. And in that suffocating dark, the chair began to hum back, its bolts alive with light. The warden's secret. By dawn, the prison was crawling with investigators, though none of them knew why Detective Ray Holbrook hadn't returned home. His car was still parked near the warden's office. His badge, still clipped to his belt, had been found outside the execution wing. And on the chamber door, smeared faintly across the metal, was a handprint in dust and blood. Warden Arthur Bellamy stood calmly as the forensics team worked. His expression didn't betray fear or guilt, only calculation. When Liz Carver stormed into the scene, she grabbed him by the arm. "Where's my partner?" she demanded. Bellamy's eyes were steady. "Detective Holbrook left last night," he said softly. "Perhaps he went home." Liz's jaw tightened. "Don't lie to me. He came here because of Marin's death. He told me he was close to something." The warden smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried no warmth. "You know what happens to people who get too close to Sing Sing's secrets, Detective Carver? They start to see things that aren't there." Liz stepped back, disgusted. "Maybe that's what you tell yourself to sleep at night." Bellamy didn't reply. He simply turned and walked away, disappearing down the hall that led to the restricted lower wing, a section of the prison even most guards avoided. Later that afternoon, Liz found her way into Holbrook's office. The lights were off. His notes were scattered across the desk, pages of scribbles about electrical surges, strange frequencies, and historical files of executions dating back to the 1930s. But one note stood out, a list of names. Every man executed by old Sparky in the last 20 years of its operation. And next to one name, circled 3 times in red ink, was William Trent. At the bottom of the page, Holbrook had written something that made her blood run cold. "Bellamy isn't the first. He's the last." She didn't understand it, not yet. But she knew she had to find that room again. When night fell, Liz returned to the restricted wing. The guards were hesitant, mumbling that the power flickered every night around midnight. One of them, a young recruit named Foster, whispered, "The generator down there hums on its own sometimes. Even when it's unplugged." She didn't respond. She only gripped her flashlight tighter and pushed open the heavy steel door leading into the execution hall. The air was different, colder, thicker. The smell of dust and copper filled her nose. And there, sitting in the center of the room, old Sparky gleamed under the faint emergency light. But something else caught her attention. On the chair sat a torn scrap of fabric, a piece of Holbrook's shirt. "Ray," she whispered into the dark. Nothing. Only silence. Then her flashlight flickered. And the generator kicked on by itself. The hum grew louder, like a swarm of bees trapped behind concrete. Liz stepped closer to the chair, her heart pounding in her chest. She noticed new marks burned into the floor, fresh, blackened lines forming a circle around the bolts. Suddenly the intercom crackled. "Liz." Her blood froze. It was Holbrook's voice. "Ray. Where are you?" she shouted. The voice was faint, broken by static. He's not Bellamy." "Liz, listen to me, Then silence. She slammed the intercom switch. Ray. Talk to me. No response. Only the sound of faint breathing from the other side, slow, heavy, unnatural. Then the voice returned, lower now, almost mocking. You shouldn't have come here, Detective Carver. She recognized it instantly. Bellamy. The door behind her slammed shut. She ran toward it, but it wouldn't budge. The lights dimmed again, leaving only the blue glow of the generator and the faint outline of the chair. Bellamy's voice echoed from somewhere unseen. Do you know what happens when you keep the current running too long, Detective? The body stops fighting. But the mind keeps flashing, burning memories into the air. Liz's voice trembled. Where's Ray? Bellamy's footsteps grew closer. He wanted answers. I gave them to him. Out of the darkness, his silhouette appeared, calm, composed, carrying a small metal case. Inside it were tools that looked like relics of another century. Copper clamps. Old voltage meters. Wires wrapped in red cloth. You see, he said, setting them down near the chair, my grandfather was here the day the chair was first used. He was the one who threw the switch. And his father before him helped build this place. We are the keepers of the current. Every Bellamy has been. Liz stared in horror. You mean your grandfather, he worked here in the 1950s? Yes, Bellamy said, smiling now. And his son, my father, took his place. You see, this prison isn't a facility. It's a tradition. A machine that feeds on guilt, on fear, on the law itself. He leaned in closer. The state might have shut the chair down in '63, but we never stopped the current. Liz backed up, shaking her head. You killed Marin. You killed Ray. Bellamy tilted his head. No. The chair did. I simply turned the key. Without warning, the generator roared to life, sending sparks up the wall. The old chair began to hum, the air vibrating with unseen energy. Liz's flashlight exploded in her hand. She fell to the floor as the room pulsed with white-blue light. Bellamy stood behind the chair now, hands gripping the control box. His face was illuminated by the glow, his eyes wild with devotion. It's not murder, Detective. It's justice. Pure, clean, eternal. Justice? She spat. You're killing men in the name of ghosts. They were guilty, he shouted. Every one of them. And those who trespassed here, joined them. Liz crawled toward the fallen intercom wire, her fingers trembling. The hum grew deafening now, shaking the walls. Then she saw it, through the haze of light, Holbrook's figure. He was slumped in the corner, pale, unmoving. Ray, she screamed. Bellamy turned, startled. He wanted to know the truth. Now he is the truth. Before he could turn back to the controls, Liz lunged. She grabbed the old voltage lever and yanked it out of the socket, snapping the wire in half. Sparks exploded, blinding her. Bellamy screamed as the electric arc jumped across the floor, connecting the metal bolts beneath the chair to his shoes. In an instant, the room filled with white fire. And then, silence. When Liz opened her eyes, the generator was dead. The chair sat smoldering in the center of the room. Bellamy lay beside it, unmoving, smoke rising from his jacket. She crawled toward Holbrook. His pulse was faint, but there. And on the wall behind them, the paint had burned away to reveal an inscription, carved long ago, perhaps by one of the condemned. The current never dies. Liz stared at it for a long time. Then she heard a sound. A faint click. The generator switch had flipped itself back on. And somewhere deep within the walls of Sing Sing, electricity began to hum again. The bloodline of Sparks. When the news broke that Warden Arthur Bellamy was found dead in the execution chamber, the state ordered an immediate lockdown. Reporters flooded Ossing's narrow streets, but no one could get past the gates of Sing Sing. The official report said, accidental electrocution due to generator malfunction. Detective Liz Carver knew better. She sat in her car just outside the gates, staring at the faint plume of smoke still rising from the prison roof. Holbrook was alive but barely conscious. He had been taken to a secure facility, and the doctors warned she shouldn't expect him to wake up soon. Still, he had whispered one word before slipping into a coma. Trent. That same name from his notebook. The name circled 3 times in red. Back in her hotel room, Liz spread Holbrook's files across the bed. Yellowed photos of electric chairs, death certificates, and a map of underground tunnels beneath the old facility. But one folder stood out, Bellamy lineage records. She opened it, expecting personnel files. Instead, she found birth certificates, newspaper clippings, and strange family documents dating back to 1899, before the prison was even built. Every generation of Bellamy's had worked at Sing Sing. wardens, electricians, maintenance workers, even a few executioners. But what froze her blood was the pattern. Each Bellamy died inside the prison, most by accident. The last line of the family tree had only one living name left, Arthur Bellamy Jr. And under it, in a child's handwriting, were the words, "The current chooses." The next morning, Liz drove to a small town called Cold Spring, just north of the prison. The records showed that the Bellamy family had a private estate there, long abandoned after the 1950s. The house sat hidden behind overgrown trees and rusted gates. The air smelled of rain and ozone, the same metallic scent from the generator room. She pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The entryway was a museum of Sing Sing's history, framed photographs of executions, yellowed schematics of the electric chair, and dozens of copper tools hanging neatly on the walls. At the center of the living room stood a wooden pedestal, and on it sat a journal bound in cracked leather. The initials AB were carved into the cover. Liz flipped it open carefully. The entries dated back to 1947, written by Arthur Bellamy Sr. The chair hums with life tonight. The current speaks, faint but clear. It remembers the condemned, their sins, their fear. It tells me the current is a bridge, between guilt and redemption. Between us and them. I no longer throw the switch alone. When I pull the lever, I feel hands beside mine, invisible, steady. They guide me. Liz shuddered. The entries continued for years, growing more obsessive until one final line. The current has chosen my son. He must continue the work. She slammed the book shut, breathing hard. That's when she heard it, a faint hum beneath the floorboards. Liz knelt down, tracing the sound to a vent near the fireplace. Warm air was pulsing from it, though the house had no power. She pulled the vent aside and saw a dim blue light flickering below. A basement. She found the door in the hallway, heavy steel just like the ones inside Sing Sing. As she pushed it open, a rush of cold air swept up, carrying that same copper scent. The stairs led her down into darkness. And then she saw it. Another chair. It was smaller, older, clearly a prototype. Thick copper wires snaked from its legs into the walls, vanishing into darkness. A generator hummed softly beside it, powered by something unseen. On the floor lay hundreds of photographs, mugshots, inmate records, newspaper headlines about executions, all marked with strange handwritten symbols. In the corner of the room stood a framed portrait of William Trent, the name from Holbrook's notes. She lifted the photo and turned it over. On the back, written in fading ink, "The one who survived the current." Liz froze. "Survived?" she whispered. That shouldn't have been possible. A sudden surge of blue light filled the room. The generator flared and the air vibrated with low rhythmic pulses, almost like breathing. Liz staggered backward, shielding her eyes. Then through the static crackle she heard a faint voice. "Detective Carver." She spun around. The voice was everywhere, echoing through the wires. "You want the truth?" "Who's there?" she shouted. "I am the truth. The current remembers." The wires along the wall began to move, twitching like veins under skin. The chair buzzed, glowing brighter, until Liz could see a faint outline forming in the air, the shimmering shape of a man, his face obscured by light. "They built me to die. But the power had other plans." Her heart pounded. "William Trent," she whispered. The figure tilted its head. "They called me that once. But names burn away when the current keeps you. The Bellamys thought they controlled me. But I was never theirs. I am the current, and I choose." Liz stumbled back toward the stairs. "What do you want from me?" The voice lowered, almost tender. "You already touched the current when you broke the circuit. It's inside you now. It knows your guilt, your fears. Soon you'll understand." The hum grew louder, shaking the basement walls. Liz bolted up the stairs and slammed the door shut. The moment she stepped outside, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Holbrook's number. One word. Run. That night, as Liz sat in her car on a deserted road, she replayed the events over and over. The Bellamy bloodline. The current that wouldn't die. The spirit of a man who had survived electrocution and somehow lived on through power itself. She looked up at the prison lights in the distance. They flickered. Once. Twice. Then, for a few seconds, every light in Sing Sing turned blue. And in the faint reflection of her windshield, she saw a face she didn't recognize, staring back. The man who lived through lightning. The night the prison lights turned blue, all of New York's Hudson Valley went dark. A total blackout, every town between Ossining and Albany, gone in a blink. The grid collapsed and generators failed one by one. For 37 seconds, there was nothing but silence and static. At exactly 12:07 a.m. the power came back. But only at Sing Sing. Detective Liz Carver was already there. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her hands trembled as she stood in front of the electric chair chamber, the same room where Warden Bellamy had died, where the hum of the current seemed to whisper her name now. She had come for answers. On the steel table beside her lay a single file marked, Execution Record Number 001, Trent, William J. The first man to die by the chair at Sing Sing according to history. But his record didn't match the others. His death certificate was unsigned. His body release form was missing. And stamped across the final page in faint blue ink was a word no one could explain. Transferred. The room was dim, washed in that same ghostly blue glow from the exposed cables above. Liz's breath fogged the air. She wasn't supposed to be here. The facility was under federal lockdown, but the badge on her chest still held weight. She ran her hand along the chair's wooden armrest, the surface worn smooth by time. The copper fittings were dark with age, yet faintly warm to the touch. "This is where it started," she whispered. A deep, mechanical hum answered. And then she heard it again, faint, distant, the same voice from the Bellamy basement. "You came back." Liz froze. The voice wasn't in the room. It was inside her head. "William Trent," she said aloud, steadying her breath. "What are you?" "Not what. Who?" The blue light pulsed once like a heartbeat. "I was the first. They built this chair for me. They called it justice. They said it would be quick." Liz felt her throat tighten. "You were the first man executed by electricity." "Executed?" The voice almost laughed. "I was burned alive for 15 minutes. They pulled the switch 5 times. My body died. But something stayed. Something in the current wouldn't let go." Her pulse raced. "You mean you're?" "I'm the echo of what they made. The energy that crawled through their wires, their walls, their hands. Every spark carries memory, detective. Every flash remembers pain." The lights flickered violently. Sparks danced from the ceiling cables, showering the chair in brief, blinding light. Liz staggered backward, shouting over the noise, "What do you want from me? You broke the circuit. You let the current live again. Now you'll finish what they started." She shook her head. "No. I'm not part of this. You are now. When you cut the generator, a surge entered your body. My current is inside you, in your nerves, your blood. You felt it, haven't you? The hum under your skin." Her hands shook uncontrollably. Every hair on her arm stood on end. She had felt it, the faint tingling in her fingertips, the static that followed her since the day Bellamy died. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you want justice. And so did I." The hum faded, replaced by the soft whine of electricity flowing through the walls. Liz stared at the chair again. She saw flashes, brief images not her own. A man strapped down, smoke rising from his skin, guards turning away, a crowd outside chanting "Justice served." Trent's voice cut through the visions. "They said I killed a man I didn't even know. They lied. The real killer wore a badge. And when I told them, they made an example of me." Liz's knees gave way. "Bellamy," she muttered. "Your executioner was a Bellamy. The first Bellamy. And his sons continued the ritual, each one serving the chair, each one feeding the current. But you can end it." "How?" "By cutting the source." The prison's emergency lights blinked out. The door behind her locked with a metallic thud. A low alarm sounded through the halls. Then came the voice of a guard on the intercom. "Detective Carver, step away from the chamber. This facility is under quarantine." She ran to the door, pounding on it. "This is Detective Liz Carver, open this." But the sound cut out. The intercom died. The chair's headpiece began to glow, brighter, louder, until it filled the room with vibrating air. The hum became a roar. "It's time." "No," Liz yelled, shielding her face. "I'm not your executioner." "You're not. You're my witness." The room exploded in light. For a moment Liz saw him, a young man bound in leather straps, eyes wide open but unafraid. His lips moved slowly, forming words she couldn't hear. Then everything went silent. When the light faded, the chair was empty. The cables hung limp. The hum was gone. On the armrest, where the brass tag used to read, "Sing Sing Chair 1899, there was a new engraving burned into the wood. Case closed. Days later, the prison reopened under federal investigation. Reporters called it a freak power surge. Officials said Detective Carver had been treated for electrical shock trauma. But those who saw her afterward, the way lights flickered when she entered a room, the faint blue reflection in her eyes, whispered something else entirely. She resigned from the force 2 weeks later, moved to a cabin upstate, and never spoke publicly about what she'd seen. Yet one night, while the maintenance team at Sing Sing repaired the old electrical lines, they found something sealed inside the wall behind the chamber. A Polaroid photo untouched by time. It showed Detective Carver sitting in the electric chair, calm, unsmiling, with a faint blue aura glowing around her hands. On the back of the photo, a message written in fresh ink. The current never dies. It just waits for someone to switch it on. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Hit subscribe because justice has many faces, and some never rest.